Okay, I'd like to welcome Atul to have us to be with us here, and thank you, Atul. And why are we here? Maybe a little limelight on that. This is our team, I would say, Atul, what we call building SRE, I would say, right? We have taken the term from Google, no doubt, SRE. But I think, to be honest, in true sense, maybe we are not there, right? And that's where I look for guidance, someone who's been there, who run this thing, and that's why I want you to be here. So yeah, this is the team, and let's get started.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see new people, and to be honest, learn from them, right?
Oh yeah.
Always great.
Yeah. So maybe we'll start, Atul, a little bit on your introduction and background.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit more about your professional journey? What did you pursue earlier? How's journey is it where you started, or how did you land here? Let me put it that way.
Okay. I think it's a tough answer because I've not necessarily traveled in a line. There have been a lot of sideways and like ups and downs. But let me just give you a quick view of it. So I'm an electronics engineer by trade, right? And right out of college, with big startup dreams, we kind of launched an initiative where we were trying to build EDA tools, which is like, how do you simulate a circuit? And that's kind of how I started, writing MATLAB code in order to simulate a transistor and CMOS, and like, how do you conduct those experiments without the necessary tools at hand? And again, we had a lot of support from Kharagpur Foundation, right? So my alma mater, we launched there, and that's kind of how my journey started. From there, I went on sideways. I dedicated a year to my father's business, to break from software.
Usual Bansal and
Yes. Oh, you already know it. You already know it, right? So I kind of went back and then came back to the industry, worked with a whole bunch of small organizations, where I could really see the value of my work, because it's kind of easy to get lost in very large organizations with hundreds and thousands of people. And worked with a number of teams before I landed in Google, and about 3 years ago. And before I even landed at Google, like I was always interested in the intersection of math and artificial intelligence. And again, if you have those interests, it's kind of the natural fit, because it has a large scale, it has tremendous amounts of data, tremendous amount of money to invest in things which might not give any returns. Works for us, right? Works for us.
For Google.
And it believes in the culture of moonshots, right? Like where you kind of shoot for the moon, see if it works or doesn't work. So it kind of fit naturally.
Okay.
So I kind of managed to land here, and I've been here since.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. It's an amazing journey to say. And maybe a follow-up on that, along your career path, if you can share, there were some pivotal moments, which, solidified your whole intent, to come into this field finally. That's okay.
No, I think, just to bring more kind of interest. So again, as I said, like right from day one, I was interested in the intersection of electronics and maths and these kind of things. Really kind of piqued my intellectual curiosity, so I was always there. But when it comes to this software systems and their reliability and how to kind of scale and mature teams and so on, I had my blue screen moment very early, because we were, right during the startup days, as a 22-year-old presenting to angel investors and so on. And of course, right, there's a crash. Why not?
The right moment.
So yeah, perfectly timed. So yeah, I'm deeply familiar with some of these pains. Okay. I may not necessarily be an SRE engineer myself, but I'm deeply familiar with why reliability of software is critical to establishing trust with your customers, your investors, potential partners, and the wider ecosystem, right? So it's absolutely essential and part and parcel of software engineering.
Awesome.
That's quite interesting of a journey that you have. Like, I'm also very curious. You being into such technical background, and you came from such technical background. Now, you might have had like your own journey in Google to set up the whole team. Maybe why don't we actually learn more about that? I'm very curious about that. Yeah.
So again, maybe more context. I don't know how much sense this will make. So, right. So my team builds some parts of a system called Speakeasy, right? So if any of you happen to be like a Pixel phone customer or a YouTube subscriber, and you have a complaint, hey, this is not working, and you ring up Google, there's a 1-800 number, or you dial a chat or whatever. Probably the system that's in use, in play, is kind of.
We only speak easy bars.
So that's kind of what I do. So it's been an interesting journey, right? And again, it's a very large responsibility because, again, Alphabet, the parent company, is like a truly global organization. So there's a lot of brand value at stake. There's a lot of credibility at stake. So availability of satisfactory support, which is kind of the domain that we deal with, is essential, right? And we want to make sure we bring in the people who understand the responsibility, aside from the technical skill sets that, of course, need to be matched and lined up to the projects in hand. You want to make sure you bring in people who understand those fundamental aspects of software and how that affects these kind of large sales systems dealing hundreds of millions of calls kind of every year. How do you deal with that, right? So you have to bring it, you have to make sure that the person who's getting in has the right mindset.
I heard a lot about Speakeasy. I'm a basic customer too. Help me understand maybe when you landed in this role, like what was the shape of that team, or maybe what challenges were you trying to tackle?
Yeah, I would love to claim that I built all of it, but I didn't. Right? So I'm just a I'm a small cog in the wheel, right? But again, I think it was in an important phase of his journey. So there was a product called Avaya. I think some of you might have even heard. It's an industry product in that area, right? It's for telephony support. And again, it just did not meet Google's demand. So for example, Google is very AI first organization, right? So if you're ringing, the chances are there's a meter running, measuring your sentiment, by the way, FYI, right? So kind of measuring the sentiment of the customer real time to kind of escalate and route to the right people and so on and so forth, right? So when I joined, I think we were kind of in the middle of that transition. So how do you ensure, again, given the scale of operations, given the potential impact on Google's brand and its customer base, and again, we have a variety of customers. We don't just have enterprise customers. We have individual customers. We have customers who use our services across the globe. They use a variety of languages and so on, right? So you have to think through these problems very consciously. So that's kind of when I joined, I hopefully helped somewhat in ensuring that the transition was smooth. And now, again, it's been a couple of years now since we managed to convert that entire traffic, which was around 200 million calls or so a year, to Speakeasy, and we consider that and celebrate that as a success.
That's amazing. That's definitely amazing. I think we are maybe 200 tickets, maybe a week for now. But yeah, I hope we all get there very soon.
Yeah. I think the other very interesting aspect, if you can help us understand, what does it look like for an SRE engineer as a day look like in Google? Like,
I think it's one of those things, and let me start by saying this, right? In Google, especially because Google has been the champion of the word. I think the very phrase came from Google, right? So it's just, software reliability engineering or site reliability engineering, whatever you want to call it. That discipline originated in Google. So inside that org, and this is something I learned, right, and absorbed, SREs are not different per se from software engineers, right? Absolutely. It's just a mindset that your software engineering skills are applied to infrastructure problems or operational problems instead of building customer-facing features, right? So in a sense, we don't look at them as particularly different from suites. Now, when it comes to their day, again, you have to balance out what's the immediate priority versus what's the long-term proactive work, right? So you could have a triage, right? You could have on-call rotation, right? To kind of make sure that there is continuous, follow the sign kind of model, and there's handoffs and so on. But then the largest focus, especially in Google, is on proactive monitoring, ensuring that we put the right systems and optimize the right systems in place so that issues don't even happen, right? Of course, we all fail at it no matter what you do. That's another problem statement. But the overwhelming focus of the SRE org is not just to be the first responders on the pager, right? So we kind of look at them as software engineers who are kind of building these automation tools and techniques for putting these processes in place, ensuring there is sufficient amount of monitoring, ensuring there is some sufficient amount of quality, that we are running the right kind of pre-submits and checks before we launch something into production, ensuring that we are kind of doing those things. So that's kind of where typically the majority of an SRE's days go, rather than responding to incidents, of which we hope there are few.
And I think that's a major learning for our team, right? Although we want to get there, but obviously the initial journey of our product too, right? So the lot of time today goes on reactive, but I think it's pretty clear, guys, we have made and heard from Atul also that we need to left shift the problems and be more proactive in nature in our day-to-day business. I think an awesome insight.
Yeah, that's definitely like, quite interesting to know. Now I'm like a little more curious. Want to understand maybe with an example, like you can pick any recent challenge that you and your team has tackled, and how that actually shaped the whole collaboration aspect. Like you did speak about a typical day, but how in SRE, if I have to talk, like what are the different teams they collaborate with, how the brainstorming happens. Maybe, if you can zoom in a little bit more with an example, it would be really good. Yeah.
Sure. Before I give you an example, there are principles I think that are fundamental to the way teams interact and look at each other, right? So the first and foremost is we have to have shared goals, right? Okay. So we have to have shared goals. So there is a natural understanding that there will be tension between velocity of software delivery and the reliability of software delivery, right? So to some extent, you have to make sure that the goals that different teams have are not at each other's purpose, at cross purposes. So the shared goals. You ensure that the structures and the reporting structures and the rest of it that people put in, again, there's kind of fundamental cross-team collaboration. And again, people don't look at each other in the friend-foe dynamic. They look at each other as support for the work that they're trying to do. So those are some of the key aspects of how an SRE is looked at. But coming back to the example, let me give you a recent one, right? And it's a really bad example, but that's the top of my mind. So very recently, we had, again, like everywhere, we have a new joinee, right? And new joinees are new joinees. They don't necessarily understand the system. There is only so much that they can learn in the time that's available to them, right? So again, we have these thousands of call routing numbers. So again, if you put 1-800 number through which you kind of reach out. So this person, innocuously enough, added a +1, thinking that, hey, it requires an IST code when they were making some sort of a configuration change. Now again, an infinitesimally small change looks innocuous, incomprehensible to catch and prepare for. But that led to, let's say, some of the YouTube creators not getting the support they wanted. Right? So that happened.
Nice.
Now, the problem is these things will happen. But how do you react to it? It's very easy to kind of blame this new joinee who probably doesn't understand the complexity of what he has done. But we try to look at it from a systemic standpoint as we do postmortems. That, hey, here are the processes and tools, and here are the automation that we could have put in place. Here's the additional test we could have added, or here's another round of canary tests we could have done to ensure that before this change hit production, it would have been caught, right? But again, that kind of led to a bunch of lessons, and together with SREs, I think our teams managed to redefine some of the ways we make change to configuration, specific to our product.
But that's maybe more about how you don't do it again. But what's the reaction mode like? It could be a much bigger incident. Like suppose a certain region of YouTube is down, right? What's the protocol followed in those cases? Is it like first customer communication, or there's a P0 protocol you have in Google which gets triggered in? How does these situations are handled?
I'll try to, because again, Google is such a universe. If YouTube is down, everybody will know.
Nobody has to inform anyone.
Nobody has to inform anyone. Right? I don't have to send any notifications to them. That's this point. So it's like, so let's say in the enterprise world, right? Like the Google Cloud or some of the some of these kind of enterprise softwares where the target is limited to a potential impact. So again, I'll talk about the preventive measures rather than the incident handling, because those are two very different things.
Absolutely. Right?
So again, in terms of preventive measures, we have very strong engineering practices, and again, SREs are inherently baked into those design principles. So how do you ensure that the software you are building is resilient? How do you, and then even if resiliency fails, how do you kind of ensure that the degradation is graceful? Right? It's not a 1 to 0, but it could be, instead of loading in 10 seconds, YouTube is now loading in 20, 25 seconds. Like maybe that's the right example I can take, right? So how do you ensure the people who are going to support, who are going to be on call, and they have inherent stake in ensuring the stability of the system, they have a seat at the table when it comes to engineering, design, and architecture, so that we build the right practices and the right designs in the first place. So that's just maybe preventive. But when it is reactive, right? Like it's no matter what you prepare for, the next incident is always going to be something different from what you prepared for, right? Like I think that's again a fundamental understanding we've learned. So again, we do have very detailed trainings when it comes to incident management, right? So every engineering team, along with SRE, has a concept of on-call training as well as rotation, so that there is an engineer on call in case something was to go wrong, right? But then you have to figure out what is the right time to escalate from SREs to dev, right? Because you don't want to continuously randomize your engineering. So I think there's a science to it. So you have to figure out that, hey, if there's a direct code change involved, of course we have to loop in the engineering. If there is a design change involved, we have to kind of loop in the engineering. If the incident is not resolving and the customer experience is continuously degrading, you have to involve the engineering, right? So there are those kind of principles which are kind of called out, very well written and practiced. Again, Google has been around for a while now, and this is where I think those principles may not be directly applicable to maybe, let's say, your situation. I'm guessing, right? But I think it is mature to a point where we have it down to the science, and where we are kind of in this area we kind of thought leaders.
As you said, maybe some principles of this will definitely be applicable to us, but I think we are still trying to scratch the surface there. That what is the right thing for us, right? Today I can imagine, right? A lot of us are new, and almost a lot of times you have to involve engineering, and then we are also trying to draw that line that what certain point should we give to engineering, and how much can be solved. So that's definitely a challenge we would look into solve too.
And we need to ensure, like, again, I think just from a twisting from the house to how do you structure the right balance between the teams, right? How do you kind of ensure that the SREs have the power to do code freezes, right? So how do they institute a code freeze? Like, somebody is releasing buggy software, I'm not going to disturb my nights supporting this guy's bad software. I have to put a code freeze, right? How do you ensure, again, that they have a seat at the table when specific reliability practices are being ignored? How do you have a continuous measurement and a scale defined for maturity of a product, right? So you kind of define those practices and you institute them so that they become less about the person and it's just a little bit more process.
Totally agree, right? Because I think we are also, again, trying to, I wouldn't say we don't have a seat at the table, but maybe it's a bit ignored, right? And again, the problem is again the velocity, because sometimes we're in such a rush to acquire customers at this stage that sometimes few things take a backseat than the feature velocity. But you're right. But these teams, like, why should I support this feature when nobody did afford to have reliability?
I think that brings me to you mentioned a very interesting point. Like, you have to be prepared every time the incident comes in. Like, what worked for the first incident, maybe that will not work for the second. My question to you is that you also touched upon shared goals. How are you incepting this thought across different teams that we are all having a similar goal, but it is cutting across different teams? So how is that? Like, people are like passionate about going and nailing that goal down together.
No, I think it starts early, right? I think you talked a little bit about, I think when you mentioned shift left reliability, right? So it starts early. Even when you're defining a product requirement, you have to think about non-functional requirements, right? So you have to start there, and then you have to own that goal of those non-functional requirements jointly across product engineering, SREs, operational support, or any other kind of dimensions that you may have in your org. So, and everybody understands that they will be jointly held responsible. So engineering cannot shirk away and say, hey, it failed. There's an incident happened, not my problem, right? And similarly, SREs cannot come and complain later that, hey, we were not invited to the design, so why are we being penalized with these constant late night pagers, right? So I think in some sense you have to have an org structure which combines these disciplines and people who own these goals so that the goal is shared and you truly operate as a single unit rather than, as I said, through your through the hacks of your ladder.
Okay.
Right? So you kind of it takes a while.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to do. It's a very hard thing to do, but I think that's what helps Google be a thought leader in this area, because we have tried to look at these disciplines as just minor variations of the same skill set.
Got it. So it comes to my mind that then basically the SREs have a sign off at multiple stages of any product feature which is going, right? Whether it's at the design stage or a review stage, and definitely a final sign off where they can actually block it. Okay, you're not giving me a monitoring observability. I am not going to support this feature.
Right.
Okay. And does that happen in Google?
Yes.
Okay.
Most of the time. We'll keep it open for those. Again, see, these things are hard, right? So let's say there's a moonshot and we have no idea, right? We are kind of trying to invest in a product area where there's no promise. As of today, there's no customer. So why bother? Right? But again, these optimalities, if you run your business this way for too long, these suboptimalities become cancers.
Absolutely.
And then it's very hard to recover. Right? So that's why let's say I'm launching a data pipeline, which is reading some storage from, I don't know, cloud storage bucket and dumping it in another area. Or it's the transformer, which is kind of applying some logic and moving data across boundaries, right? We have to be sure that when these pipelines are written, reliability is a core principle that is addressed as part of design.
Okay.
And you have to, when you launch, you have to make sure that there is observability, as you touched upon, so that I can monitor the health of the pipeline. I can monitor how many runs have executed successfully and fail, what kind of data inconsistencies might have been generated to become more specific, right? So you have to have those things in place.
Got it.
I think practices, some of the best principles, shared goals. I think these are definitely need of the hour.
Yeah. Well, I think we are also at an inflection point of our company, right? Where we are, the growth has to be a sustainable growth now, rather than just mindless growth, for sure. Especially in terms of, I wouldn't say that in terms of revenue, but definitely in terms of our features and stuff. Yeah. Maybe a few questions on a team structure, right? How does specific in terms of if does an SRE is a unit supporting a particular product at Google, or they're cut across products, or and what kind of titles, job roles, L1, L2s, I don't know what the things. Maybe some limelight if you can throw on those things.
Definitely L4.
I'll try to describe Google's org structure. I've still not understood it. Because again, it's kind of a micro universe in its own right. But there are multiple models of SRE and product engagement, right? So we have a model called T0, where everything that a kind of a product or a line of business is doing that is supported by an SRE group, and we'll talk about the SRE structures themselves. So that's kind of the first, the most immature model, where you as an eng leader are essentially handing off your responsibility, very consciously stating and accepting the fact that, hey, I don't have the skill set in the team, so I need an external stakeholder on the table who will hold my team responsible. And in those structures, like some of the eng managers could be, let's say, reporting into an SRE director, and those kind of things happen, right? So the structures are there to support the model which is being discussed. Then there is a T1, which is kind of the middle tier, where you have an assisted model, right? Where you say, hey, I do understand, we do have some practices and processes in place, we do have automation, we do have proactive monitoring and of quality of the product and availability and latency. We're doing all of these things, but we need support. We don't have mastery in understanding how do we take this software from 999 to 59.
Okay.
So I need assistance, right? And that's kind of the model they sign up for. And the structures are kind of built accordingly. And then you have mature teams. Like I think our product somewhat falls in that area, where the reliability practices are so mature and the product has, again, there are metrics to measure how well a product has done, the number of incidents that happen, the severity of it, the impact of it, and so on. Based upon those measurements, you assess the product to be so mature and so self-sufficient that it's just a consulting practice that you do maybe an external review once a year to kind of make sure you have not kind of screwed something or kind of tempered with something which is working well. But the team, which is responsible for the product, completely owns the reliability end to end, right?
So that's something.
That brings me the very interesting question on the metrics. Like I understand, Speakeasy, they'll have like some metrics like really coldly focused, but if you have to think about metrics the SREs have to care about, what could be those, like top of your mind?
See, again, when it comes to reliability, there are principally 4 things, right? There's availability, right? There is latency. There is performance. What's the third one? Fourth one that I'm missing? It's one more. It'll come to me. Sorry, happens. So those are essentially the 4 metrics. And every time you're launching a software feature, you have to make sure that you are defining and ensuring some agreed upon SLOs in all of those areas are being met, right? So for example, there's no 100% success rate, right? Yeah. So we have a concept called error budgets.
Okay.
Right. So we have this concept of error budgets where we say, hey, this product or this API, which I don't know has a QPS of 1,000, so there's a million calls in a day. This has an error budget of 50 failures per day. Right? And based upon that, you define the urgency of an SRE addressing a failure for that API.
Okay, interesting.
Right? Yeah. So you define a gradient scale based upon which you are supposed to address that. But I think again, in terms of going back to the metrics we used to measure the stability and reliability of the software, I think that's kind of typically how we look at it. Does that somewhat give you?
I was able to relate. I mean, when I was in Google Cloud, like some of the metrics that we kept was totally different than Speakeasy. But then, for team to team, the metrics differ.
Yes.
And that's where I was very curious, like what could be the metrics for SREs to measure and thrive and just go behind. Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah. Maybe something a bit on budget allocation, right? Like, is there a defined metric, right? And let's maybe talk about a cloud kind of product. Like, if I have these many tenants, I need to add more SREs, or resources to it. Or is there a metric on a dollar value or an ARR value? Is there some system that how does that, or what is a good percentage of budget we should go to an SRE team versus an engineering team, or depending on ARR? What is the first science behind it, and what's the percentage if you have some idea about it?
I'll run or reveal sensitive information. But in principle, I think most of the teams which follow the tier 1 model of assisted support, they try to maintain a ratio of 1 to 10 between SREs and SWEs.
Okay.
That's the typical Google default, right? And I'll come to the budgetary computations in a minute, because those things can change widely, right? Depending upon where your individuals are located, what's the cost of kind of labor and so on and so forth. But typically we try to maintain a ratio of 1 to 10 by default between SWEs and SREs.
Okay.
But again, the point of this is it's a hard number to suggest to anyone, right? I feel every organization, depending upon the context, depending upon the state of their business's evolution, depending upon the maturity of their practices, might find that number to be completely incorrect. It might find that completely incorrect, right? So I think the right way to look at it is maybe not through a budgetary lens. And I know from a business standpoint, right? Hey, I am, we have to make certain decisions and we have to start somewhere, right? And then we can find it. So we start somewhere.
Okay.
But I think, in my experience, if you look at the budgetary allocation in SRE typically dips when the practice is mature.
Okay.
Right. So there's a gradient where you have no investment, and then you keep building till you have a situation where everybody's just complaining about your software, and then somebody comes and hey, like this organization is a mess, so we'll throw money at the problem. So I think those cycles are hard to avoid, and I'm yet to see a team which has managed to avoid it.
We are on the right path then. We are definitely on the gradient as of now, but hope to get
down. No, that's expected, I guess.
Yeah.
But if I have to cut the chase and ask you about just on the budget side, given we are Series A and soon we will be Series B, but would you again going back to the principles and the thoughts that you have put in? But is there a rough figure that you think about this should be an overall budget, just allocated for the SRE? And also getting back to the whole business ideas that you've had it in the past, and just maybe pick up that hat.
I think it's 10%. It's like, again, from an engineering investment standpoint, that's, I feel, the starting point.
Okay.
You have to tune it for the project at hand. And again, I know you asked a more nuanced question around, if you're trying to support enterprise software and those softwares sign up to different levels of support and availability, you have to take those metrics into account.
Okay.
But I think the point of this is, if you make your SRE practices very differentiated depending upon the nature of sign up, when the actual product is a multi-tenant, multi-region, multi-dimensional product, and the rest of it, then you will find that backfire.
Okay.
Right. So I think it seems to make logical sense. So that if you're selling reliability as a key aspect of your business or key aspect of the solution that you're kind of pushing into the market, then you have to provide differentiated support in terms of availability, response times, and so on. And that may guide the level of investment you want to make. But typically, if you have a multi-tenant software, if you have a cloud-native application which is spread across regions and geographies, trying to provide support or thinking about SRE from the dimensions of budget to begin with may not be the best starting point.
Okay, got it. That's right. Okay, reach a point where you can decide the budget.
Yeah.
Awesome. Maybe some insights into the tools SREs use, or what kind of insights they have access to on day-to-day basis, right? If for these metrics and stuff, is it like a centralized observability system, or it's every product can come with their own? How does these principles are laid out?
Talking about Google tools, that's a fun exercise, right? Again, I'll throw that same phrase at you. Google is a universe. So no tool that Google uses, let me just say that out loud.
Yeah.
No tool that Google uses exists outside of Google.
Okay.
So you'll find it hard to correlate.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
But let me just start by saying a couple of examples. Right? So some of the principal tools that we have are called Borgmon and Monarch.
Okay.
Right. So this is where, so let's say I'm hosting a service, and that service, let's say, exposes a bunch of API endpoints.
Okay.
Now, based upon that, I want to measure as an SRE, I want to make sure that my service scales so that it can respond in a timely fashion to the number of requests coming in, right? So you have to make sure that the service is deployed and the number of instances running, and there is kind of auto scaling happening accurately in the dimensions of that. So all of this information, so there is a deployment specific information which is telling you how is your binary running into the infrastructure, right? And the health of those binaries and the health of that physical infrastructure. Okay. So there's one aspect of that. Course. Then there's a second aspect of the actual software that you're running or hosting on those machines. And that's kind of what your customers really want. Right? They want to call your APIs and call your queries and whatever else that they're kind of trying to do. And you are trying to measure, again, what's the rate of incoming requests? What's the latency figures look like? What is the percentile value? What is the cyclic error rate? What is the, my 75 percentile? Is it meeting the predefined SLOs that I agreed upon with the business? So then I think we have, as I said, we have a Monarch tool which helps you do all of that. Now again, we can get into the detail of some of this, but you guys might find that completely out of the box here.
Get it. And obviously, a major part of SRE at Google goes into automation aspects, right?
Yes. Yes.
And what happens there? Like, is it a platform, or again, every SRE team is again free to pick up their automation, standards or tools and platforms, or it's just again a principle from Google perspective, and everyone just need to follow that thing?
Good question, actually, very good question. So again, in Google, there are recommendations and best practices, right? So without getting into the Google's org structure, there are pillars, right? There are the product areas, right? YouTube and search and so on, like some of them. So each product area defines certain levels of acceptable standards for the products that it produces. Now, again, those are recommendations. And then you have smaller units. So, within, let's say, core, we have somebody who's building a cloud native, ICE, right? So somewhere people write code. Now, those organizations might go and further fine tune those recommendations.
Okay.
But the actual definition of requirements will come from that specific team. So individuals, have the independence to define the goals. They have to define them because I think the process demands that they define them. Very similarly to the targets for SLOs and so on and so forth. You also have recommendations throughout the chain of command, which tells you what is the tool, what is the default tool, what level of support we have in the ecosystem for this tool, and what's available, what is the alternative. So it kind of captures the best recommendations and practices. But again, I think people can deviate from those recommendations depending upon the use case that they're trying to support. Right? So it's not a completely top-down or bottoms-up, but it's kind of somewhere in the middle.
Recommendations plus need of the hour.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, maybe something on, I know Google is well established, matured, but let's talk about some challenges. I'm sure you still face some challenges running this whole thing, especially at such a huge scale. Why don't you tell us about some challenges your team faces in this area?
Trying to think through it now. All right. I think one of the challenges, and again, this is me talking because I've spent most of my lifetime actually in small organizations, my own startup and so on and so forth. The more process and the more number of roles you introduce between the customer and the software engineer, the level of connect and the level of ownership of those principles kind of gets diluted, right? So I think there's one very fine cultural nuance where we want our engineers to be directly connected to the end customer so they understand what to build.
Okay.
Right? So that's kind of, I think, it's not an SRE question, it's not an SRE answer, but I think it's a fine balance that you have to draw between how much responsibility do you want to delegate versus how much responsibility do you want to have. Which is where I think we said in Speakeasy, hey, we don't need any SREs. We don't need any specialized SREs because guess what? We have this team. This team has kind of got it covered, right? To some extent. Again, I'm not recommending whatever it can be construed. But in terms of challenges, I feel the largest challenge for Google at this time is optimization of cost. Right. So again, I think even I'm not privy to some of those numbers. We have investments going to the tune of $50 billion into the new data centers that Google is setting up now. And how do you ensure that all of these ML experiments, because generative AI is the cool thing and Google is the industry leader and so on, how are these investments used correctly? So typically the software reliability has been weighing heavily in favor of reliability versus cost. But I think as an organization, I think Google is recalibrating to figure out how does it judiciously allocate the right resources to the right products, and how does it optimize the cost of operations. I think that's kind of where I think again, from a SRE standpoint, I think we are fairly mature. We have a lot of thought leaders actually to kind of address the challenges that maybe many organizations have not yet even faced, right? So we are optimizing for the next level of problems. I'll give you one example, right? So our new generation blade machines are producing so much heat that the building which is cooling them is not able to keep up. Now that's not an SRE problem, it's probably an operational problem. But I think they are getting constant alerts because some inference is failing because the infrastructure is not able to keep up with the required load. Right? So it's a very different scale of a problem. I don't know how many other organizations face that.
Well, that's very interesting.
You can talk about.
I think maybe I'll talk about one incident we faced recently. So we run databases for a big railway corporation in the US, and they recently went live with very critical databases on us. And one fine day we get a ticket that a train which has 100 bogies runs fine. A train which has more than 100 bogies doesn't run fine. I was like, okay, let's get into it. So we went to it. We went the DBREs. We started looking into it. And it turns out that we have a data warehouse system which we run, and it's a big system. It's around a 70 terabyte database. What we run for them, and looks like each coach of the bogey makes a database connection
Okay.
to make some runtime decisions to decide on some, because it's a good stream. So it needs to see how much can I fit more, how much I have capacity. So the database is able to handle only 100 connections at a time, but not more than that, right? Interesting in terms of customer impact, but for us it's a different problem altogether, right? Yeah, and that's why I always tell my team also, always try to learn. Tessell might be doing certain features, but what's the business use case? Such interesting stories around. Can't even imagine what kind of impact we can have.
Great example.
Yeah.
Great example. It's again like things that you assume to be axioms, right? When you're doing design and so on, you will figure out later in life that hey, they don't hold.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody, I'm sure, some developer wrote that hey, 100 connections more than sufficient.
Yes.
Why do they need more? Why do you spin up a bigger thread pool than that? Why waste resources? I'm sure somebody thought like that. Perfectly fine, legitimate thought process.
Exactly.
But guess what? It didn't work.
Didn't work.
On similar lines, the same company told me that we've got a database live with you, which decides which track the train can go at runtime. And my first question was, I hope it's not a passenger train. So, you're not. That's jokes apart, but yeah, right? Yeah, it's small, but I think we really run some critical systems today on Tessell platform.
Great to hear. Great to hear that you're able to kind of, it's a great example to have railway systems and things of that nature, which are of critical importance to business and people running on your systems. That's what teaches you, right? I think people like me can come and talk to you all you want, and we can help give you the basic core of how other organizations have been structured and how they have succeeded. But it's a path, it's a journey, and everyone has to travel it for themselves.
Yeah. And we also see the load of the team is increasing, but it gives us a good idea that the consumption of the service is increasing. Right? It's a very, very fair idea. It's not a good problem to have that you're not getting incidents, I feel.
So I think the best way to optimize, for SRE as you scale your businesses, the team should scale sublinearly to the size of your business. Right. Yeah. So if you're proportionately or you're kind of scaling longer than that, then there are definitely kinks in the armor.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it will continue to scale, but it should scale sublinearly to the wider scale.
Yeah, that's true. Business might grow exponentially, but the SRE teams and even the engineering, I would say, should grow more linearly than correspond to that. Yeah, otherwise, how do we show margins? Exactly. The customer's growth base should be hockey stick growth, not our cost. Not our cost. Yeah. Maybe a couple of last questions. Maybe what do you see new trends emerging in SRE field, right? Especially from Google and being the pioneer and the guiding the whole industry on this. What excites you more upcoming?
I'll tell you something that I was trying to do with my team.
Okay.
So again, there's AI in the air right now.
Yeah.
Right? If anywhere you go, AI is in kind of the air. So we are trying to, I think again, not just we as Google and other big tech, is trying to figure out how to leverage AI to predict the node that we fill in data center. To schedule the maintenance at the right time, to optimize the number of backup hard drives a particular system needs. So I think AI ops is emerging in a big way. The second thing that I feel is coming up, again, it's been around for a while, but I think it's picking up now, is chaos engineering. So how do you deliberately inject some level of failures in your ecosystem, in your system, to test out the response and the resilience of your product? Right, so I think that is emerging as its own discipline, which is very interesting in the SRE universe. I feel
very interesting.
And again, how do you, as I kind of was trying to talk about earlier, in terms of how do you support the ML loads and the use cases and the corresponding infra? So that is coming up as a different discipline altogether. So I feel like those are three new trends, while the other kind of trends mature.
I think we just today morning we were discussing about whole ML thing. That I think we are in the verge of thinking
because now we are as a team realizing patterns, right? Where are we seeing the issues? And it's a lot of repeatable things. And I speak to my team, maybe we should just get automated about it. Our CEO was on call with us today morning, and the term he used was reduce the toil in the system. Right? You cannot be doing more and more. Everyone should get their nights back. I think on that note, I think awesome talking to you, Atul.
Same here. Love the conversation.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for
Any
having
questions
me.
from the group?
So coming back to the SLOs part, right? And Google is a big firm with multiple products, and definitely the business requirements will also be different. So is there any pattern or process you follow to identify the SLIs for your SLO system, right? How do you ensure that you get the right metrics out of it? Because see, there are some general common metrics which like CPU is there, memory is there, database availability and all those things. But these requirements could change. For example, if you are having an application which is having a very high concurrency rate or a raw rocket bandwidth, sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. So there you will be actually measuring the concurrency. But at the same time, if it is a system which is running smoothly, but sometimes it is getting a load, so you will be measuring the system parameters. So in those cases, what practice Google actually follows to identify those key metrics to follow or to monitor?
Great question. Let me say that right at the outset. It's again, I'll give you a complicated answer maybe. It's a hard thing to universalize, right? Okay. It again depends upon the product that you are building and the service that you are providing. Everything is conditioned upon that. If you are building a critical infrastructure piece, let's say, which is supporting a payment gateway, right? I'm giving you a different example. Then doesn't matter what the best recommendation is or the best practice is, even one failure is critical to your business and its reputation, right? So you will define your SLO and you will identify the metric, right? Let's say if it's an API failure rate or it's an API response rate. You will define the metric based upon the business impact that that particular metric will have. So you can start with some set of basic recommendations. I think you already listed a few. You can find similar recommendations for the stack that you are trying to kind of build upon. But I feel it's not optimal to limit yourself to the metrics defined by the tech stack that your product is built on. You have to identify the metrics that impact the business that you're trying to run and go from there. You can find these common practices and these common SLIs everywhere. I'm sure you already know most of them. But you have to contextualize that to the business so that that business, and that's where I think the example comes into play, you have to understand that there can be more than 100 bogies in a rail in order to make sure that the thread pool is larger than 100. Or you set up a alert if the number of connection is approaching 8 times or whatever else, right? So you have to have, you cannot divorce operations and SRE from actual product requirements, which is why I said shared goals and understanding of the product and having a seat at the table early on is critical in ensuring that the functions do their jobs. Right? Does that?
Completely makes sense. It definitely, these things will vary up to the business requirements. Thank you for answering that. This actually brings me to another question around chaos engineering, right? I know it's a very cool term to have right now in the market, but at the same time, we as a startup, let me put it that way, chaos engineering is actually very beneficial where the systems are really big and you actually go and break the systems out there. Thinking it from the startup point of view, like how do you think it would be useful for us? Right now we are having a limited load, right? But from the data, as a database, as a service company, right? How do you think it would be useful for us? And we utilize ML to get the historical data when we lean into chaos engineering, right? So as in a startup, like what are some practices you get those data to decide, okay, these are some certain parameters which I can utilize and break the system over here. Like how do you identify those metrics? What I need to break right now?
Let me start by giving you a contrarian answer. Okay. Chaos engineering may not even be relevant in the way it's defined by the leading minds of the industry today to the problems that you guys are facing. Let me be blunt with you, right? Because again, it's the theory which is promoting that. I don't know if you've read any white papers on the subject. The theory which is promoting that is premised on availability of 1 million plus nodes. Right, and I'm not sure what's the scaling, and I wish you all the success, but it'll take you a while before you hit there. Right? So let me start by saying that. But you could identify some learnings from that core concept and apply that, bring that down to your problem statement. So some example could be, how does my system handle a data recovery step, right? So let's say you do some periodic backups. What happens to the health of your system when you are deploying those backups? Is this a deterministic state? Is that an undeterministic state? How do you measure that? How do you ensure that the other services, like let's say there's a query engine running on top of this data stack, and that is exposed to the customer who's kind of trying to reach out to you. How do you ensure that that service has the resiliency built in so that it does not lead to other cascading failures, right? So while you're trying to restore a database, you have a logic written, somebody wrote a design that, hey, I want to prevent cascading failures. So if this node is not available, go and read from that node. But guess what? That is also under some sort of a recovery process. So all you are doing at that point is compounding the load on the system without necessarily serving the customer. So how do you forestall that before the request even comes in, and how do you prevent that kind of going out? So again, this is where I think the concept of error budgets and defining specific redundancy strategies comes in kind of critical play. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Very good.
Thanks.
I think that I have a question. Is it like plugin here? Okay. It's basically from the team side. Thanks for joining, first of all, Atul.
No.
It's a good day for us. It's a very hard day. From the team perspective, kind of since I lead the whole team, thinking like come from dev exercise or dev teams, I manage it all. I thought it's very easy to manage a product or the dev team because there is a projectized metrics around it. You can silo them into some kind of projects and make them rock stars out of it. Because they work on different skills, different technologies, we can segregate them. But I feel there's some challenge in SRE because most of the people are doing the same job because the whole SRE is like into shifts. Same thing, same handover goes to different team or different person, next come in shift. So I would feel some challenge around it. How do I track productivity for the SRE team? Like how do I make sure that this guy is doing different than this guy, and how do I make sure they're motivated to do something different in SRE, in the boundary of SRE? Don't go outside, don't do dev work, but in the boundary of SRE, how do I make sure that there is a productivity and motivation to do better and something different? Innovations and all are the keys. And when I do innovations in dev, it was very easy for me to pull some kind of ideas. Because ideation is one very important feature in Dell where I kind of worked for last 1 decade almost. Okay. But here I feel in SRE there is ideation wise, we need to figure out that what is the right thing to do in ideation. How do I innovate? In dev it's pretty easy.
Great question, and actually a very timely question. relevant I feel for most startups.
Yeah.
I think this is kind of the journey. And again, I think what we need to actualize maybe in this team is that these are not necessarily, I think I started by saying this, and it's going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight, but you need to recognize the fact that right now, I think what you're doing, to be very honest, if you ask yourself this question, a lot of your team is going to be focused on incident response, or they're kind of doing operational support right, for the issues. So they maybe don't even have any time left to innovate, to learn. Right?
Yeah.
So I think as the leader of the org, you should institute, again, I'll not go beyond my remit here.
Well, that's fine.
We should institute a boundary or a balance between reactive support versus proactive support, right? And that itself will lead to some amount of innovation ground up. Now again, we have to have the right mindset. People who are kind of in this team, and I'm looking at everyone, they need to think of themselves as Swedes applying their skills to a different problem statement, right? They are just applying their skill set to the infra and operations problem instead of the feature problem. Yeah. They have to, I think that shift in mindset is easy to talk about, but it's almost impossible, or it takes a long time to kind of reflect on the ground and put it on the ground. So I think as you mature this org, and as you go from the follow the sun model or whatever shifts you have, and the rosters that people are kind of struggling with, that hey, all I do is like wake up at 12, I have a 12 to 9 shift, and all I do is take up one issue and response, then I go to bed, there's the same problem happening again. So you have to very consciously allocate resources and time and reward those behaviors to automate some of the toil that you're kind of experiencing. I think that's the starting point. And then the larger shift in mindset. So when you hire people who think in that fashion, who think of themselves as software engineers applying their skill set to a different area. And you build the team and the culture accordingly. I think it takes a while, but I think you have to start somewhere. Yeah. But that's what I would recommend.
But probably my question is a little bigger in scope. In Google also you find the similar issues and the problems that in SRE, respective to SRE, this challenge persists everywhere.
So again, I think Google has the SRE as a discipline in Google is more or less software engineering. We have people switching back ladders back and forth.
Okay.
So again, in Google, this is not necessarily a problem, but we do have operational teams who are responsible for some very limited strategies. So again, I think you may need to differentiate those
At certain point,
at certain point in time, and you do need to, as I said, like you may need have a seat at the table so that there is joint ownership or some of the goals that that you feel that you are kind of responsible for and delivering on.
Correct. Pretty awesome. I think that's what I thought as a question for you at this point of time. You already looks tired. So
I think we topped the hour. So and the guys, I think have a couple more agendas.
No, absolutely.
I think I'll let you be on your Friday evening.
No, it's not a Friday evening, to be honest. We'll talk about that maybe some other time.
Cool. I think
all right.
Awesome meeting you, man.
Nice to see you.
Thank
Nice
you.
to see
Thank you.
everyone. Again, nice to see you as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thank you for being an amazing audience.
Oh, yeah, we'll take good photo. Come.
Thank you so much.
How do we say?